The Saranai starship Velaron glided silently through the endless expanse of space, its surface a fusion of living rock and bioengineered tree-like structures. The vessel, immense and ancient, was a testament to the Saranai's mastery of organic technology. Its exterior pulsed with a faint bioluminescent glow, a living entity that seemed to breathe as it moved through the void, each ripple of light marking the ship's passage across the stars. Inside the Velaron, the atmosphere was serene yet purposeful. The ship's corridors were wide and vaulted, with walls that resembled the trunks of ancient trees, their surfaces warm to the touch, pulsing softly with life. Vines intertwined overhead, their leaves glowing gently, providing illumination in place of artificial lighting. The air was thick with the scent of earth and foliage, a constant reminder that this was not just a machine, but a living organism, nurtured and cultivated by the Saranai over centuries. The Saranai themselves moved with deliberate grace through these halls, their tall feathered forms exuding an air of wisdom and calm. Standing at an average of 8 feet, the Saranai were imposing yet serene, their bodies adorned with intricate patterns of feathers and scales, each designed unique to the individual. Their faces, elongated and sharp, bore eyes that reflected the light with an almost ethereal glow, eyes that had seen the passage of millennia. This ancient race had long outlived many of the stars in their sector, their lives stretching across the eons. The Saranai matured slowly, taking nearly 3,700 Earth years to reach adulthood, their minds absorbing knowledge and experience at a pace incomprehensible to younger species. Time to the Saranai was a river, steady, unhurried, and patient. They were a species accustomed to the gradual unfolding of events, each decision weighed carefully, each action taken with a long view in mind. Such a perspective made them naturally skeptical of the younger species they occasionally encountered, especially the Terrans. The humans of Terra, with their brief lifespans and frenetic pace of development, were almost an enigma to the Saranai. To the Saranai, the Terrans were hasty, prone to recklessness, and too often driven by emotion rather than wisdom. It was difficult for the Saranai to comprehend how beings that lived barely a fraction of their own lives could possess any meaningful depth of understanding, particularly in matters as complex as the maintenance and operation of starships. Yet, despite their skepticism, the Saranai were not close-minded. They recognized the Terrans' remarkable adaptability and their capacity for innovation, even if they found the rapid pace of their achievements unnerving. Still, when the Saranai had agreed to allow a young Terran to join their crew as a starship technician, they did so with reservations. The idea that a 17-year-old human, barely out of childhood by their standards, could contribute anything of substance to the operations of the Velaron was met with a mix of doubt and curiosity. For the Saranai, this was an experiment, a test, not just of the Terrans' abilities, but of their own willingness to adapt to the unpredictable nature of these younger species. As the Velaron continued its journey through the cosmos, the crew would soon learn whether their decision had been a wise one, or if their doubts about the capabilities of the young Terran technician were justified. The docking bay of the Velaron was a marvel of organic engineering, with walls that pulsed softly like the heartbeat of a living creature. Eli Drake stepped out of the small Terran shuttle, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and nervous excitement. His toolkit was slung over one shoulder, but it was the item hanging off his belt that drew attention, a worn, reliable hammer that Eli had affectionately dubbed the Persuader. As Eli surveyed his surroundings, he caught sight of the Saranai crew. Their tall, feathered forms moved gracefully around the bay, their deep, ancient eyes settling on him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. One figure, taller than the rest, approached him with measured steps. This was feathered sage Hedar, a figure of authority aboard the vessel. "Welcome aboard, Technician Drake," Hedar said, his voice calm but laced with caution. His gaze drifted to the hammer hanging off Eli's belt. "I see you've brought a rather primitive tool with you. Is that? Eli grinned, patting the persuader. Yup, this here's my persuader. When things don't go the way they're supposed to, sometimes you've just gotta remind 'em who's boss. Nothing like a good old thump to straighten out a stubborn piece of machinery. Hadar raised an eyebrow, his concern evident. We, the Sarnai, prefer more delicate methods. The use of such forceful tools is not common among us. Eli shrugged, his grin turning into a smirk. Yeah, well, sometimes you need a little persuasion to get the job done. It's like trying to get a rusted bolt loose. You can whisper sweet nothings to it all day, but sometimes it just needs a good bang to loosen up. Besides, he added with a wink, if a gentle touch is all it took, I wouldn't need to keep this bad boy on me. The Saranai's feathers ruffled slightly, a subtle sign of discomfort, but Hadar maintained his composure. I hope you will exercise caution with your methods. The Velaron is a living entity and it requires respect. Eli nodded, though the mischievous glint in his eyes remained. Don't worry, boss. I'm not about to go around beating the old girl into submission. But if something decides to act up, the persuader's here to keep things in line. Think of it as my backup plan, you know? In case all that gentle coaxing doesn't do the trick. Hadar sighed, clearly unsure whether to be amused or concerned. The Saranai do not take youth lightly, he began, as if changing the subject. Our species matures slowly over thousands of years. We value experience and wisdom, qualities that come with time. It is unusual for us to place trust in someone who has lived but a fraction of our lifetimes. Eli's grin widened, and he tilted his head slightly. Hey, I might be young, but I've already learned one thing. Sometimes life doesn't wait for you to catch up. You either learn fast or you get left behind. And trust me, I've picked up a few tricks along the way. Whether it's a plasma spanner or a persuader, I won't let you down. Hadar studied him for a moment, then gave a slight nod. We shall see, he said, his tone still measured. Come, I will show you to your quarters and the workspaces. There is much to be done. As they walked through the corridors of Velaron, Eli couldn't help but marvel at the ship's design. It was unlike anything he had seen before. Every surface seemed alive, with vines that glowed faintly and walls that breathed, expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic pattern. It's incredible, Eli murmured, half to himself. Hadar's pace slowed slightly. The Velaron is one of our oldest vessels, he explained. It has been with us for many Kron, a living entity that we have nurtured and grown. It is more than a machine. It is part of our history. Eli nodded, feeling a deep respect for the ship and its inhabitants. I hope to learn as much as I can, he said earnestly, then added with a mischievous grin. And don't worry, I promise to keep the persuader in its holster unless absolutely necessary. Hadar glanced at him, the corners of his mouth curling into what might have been a Saranai version of a smile. You will have your chance, Eli Drake. The Velaron is a challenging environment, even for the experienced, but challenges have a way of revealing true potential. Eli smirked, feeling a bit of the tension in his chest ease. I'm ready for it. As they arrived at Eli's quarters, Hadar paused at the door. Rest and prepare yourself, Technician Drake. Tomorrow you will begin your duties. We will be watching closely. Eli nodded, his mind already racing with thoughts of the tasks ahead. Thanks, boss. I won't disappoint you. Hadar gave a final nod before turning to leave. We shall see, he repeated, his tone carrying a hint of something Eli couldn't quite place. Anticipation, perhaps, or maybe curiosity. As the doors closed behind him, Eli exhaled deeply, leaning against the wall of his quarters. The weight of the challenge ahead was heavy, but so was his determination. He was ready to show the Saranai what a Terran, even a young one, could do, with a plasma spanner in one hand and, when necessary, the trusty persuader in the other. The next morning, Eli found himself standing in the engineering bay of the Velaron, surrounded by the Saranite crew. The space was as awe-inspiring as the rest of the ship, large, open, and alive with the soft, pulsing light of organic components intertwined with advanced technology. Vines stretched across the ceiling, their leaves emitting a gentle glow that illuminated the various workstations. Feathered Sage Hadar was there, along with several other senior Saranite technicians, their expressions guarded as they observed the young Terran. Eli could feel the weight of their scrutiny, their deep ancient eyes assessing him, questioning his presence among them. It was clear that while Hadar had extended a cautious welcome, the rest of the crew wasn't as easily convinced. One of the senior technicians, a Saranite with feathers tinged in deep blues and purples, stepped forward.
"You are young, even by Terran standards,"
he began, his voice laced with doubt.
"Your reputation precedes you, but experience is not something one can gain overnight. We Saranai have lived for centuries, mastering our crafts. It is difficult to see how someone who has lived but a few short years can truly contribute here."
Eli's grin vanished, replaced by a hard-edged smirk. He crossed his arms, letting his gaze sweep over the crew.
"Listen, Feathers, I don't need a millennium to figure out what's what. I've been elbow deep in Starship guts since before I even knew what my other elbow was for, so don't let my age fool you. I've forgotten more about fixing ships than you'll learn in your next 1,000 years of playing with your delicate touch."
The Saranite technician's feathers ruffled visibly, a clear sign of unease.
"We are not accustomed to relying on brute force,"
he replied, motioning at Eli's hammer, his tone cool but clearly taken aback by Eli's bluntness. Eli uncrossed his arms and gave his persuader a playful tap.
"Brute force? Call it what you want, but sometimes a good smack with this persuader is all it takes to knock some sense into stubborn machinery. You can cuddle your systems all day, but when the shit hits the fan, you're gonna wish you had someone like me around to do the dirty work."
Hadar, who had been silently observing the exchange, stepped in, trying to diffuse the tension.
"Technician Drake, while we appreciate your confidence, you must understand that the Velaron is unlike any ship you have encountered. Its systems are complex, living entities that require a delicate touch. For now, we will assign you to routine maintenance tasks. Consider it a chance to familiarize yourself with the ship and our methods."
Eli raised an eyebrow, unimpressed.
"Routine maintenance? Fine. I'll play nice and handle your precious ship with kid gloves. But don't expect me to sit back and polish knobs all day. I'm here to get shit done, not to babysit a bunch of overgrown houseplants."
The crew exchanged glances, their skepticism still evident. Hadar gestured toward a set of consoles at the far end of the bay.
"Begin with the environmental control system. They require constant monitoring and adjustments. This will give you an understanding of how our living ship interacts with its environment."
Eli started walking toward the consoles, but paused and turned back, his smirk widening into a grin.
"And by the way,"
he added, his voice dripping with sarcasm,
"if it takes your kids 1,000 years just to learn basic math, you're gonna want someone like me around to do more than just fix things. I might end up teaching your crew a thing or two while I'm at it. Maybe I'll start with how to count to 10 without using your feathers."
The Saranite technician's feathers puffed out in irritation, but he held his tongue, clearly taken aback by Eli's audacity. Hadar's calm, composed facade faltered for just a moment before he regained his composure.
"Technician Drake, we expect you to conduct yourself professionally,"
he said, his tone carrying a note of warning.
"We are a disciplined crew, and we value respect."
Eli shrugged, unbothered by the reprimand.
"Respect's a two-way street, boss. Show me some, and you'll get it back. Until then, I'll keep doing what I do best, fixing things and cracking jokes. Just don't get your feathers in a twist."
As Eli made his way to the consoles, he could feel the eyes of the Saranai on his back, no doubt questioning his methods and attitude. But that was nothing new to him. People always doubted him, until they saw the results, and these feathered skeptics would be no different. The environmental control systems were a blend of organic and technological interfaces with bioluminescent panels and living conduits that pulsed gently as they regulated the ship's atmosphere. Eli got to work, his hands moving swiftly over the controls, his mind quickly adapting to the alien technology. As he worked, he muttered to himself, half in concentration, half in defiance.
All right, let's see what we've got here. Oxygen levels stable. Humidity's a bit high. Nothing a little tweak won't fix. There we go. Easy does it. Not rocket science. Hell, this ain't even basic math.
The Saranai technicians observed in silence, their expressions still wary, but Eli could tell they were watching closely, perhaps waiting for him to screw up, but that wasn't going to happen. Not on his watch. After a few hours, Eli finished his assigned tasks and turned back to the crew, wiping his hands on his pants.
All set? She's running smoother than a Terran brothel on payday.
The Saranai exchanged looks of mild confusion at his analogy, though the message was clear enough. Hadar stepped forward, his expression still reserved.
You have performed adequately, Technician Drake, but these were simple tasks. The true challenges lie ahead. We will continue to monitor your work closely.
Eli rolled his eyes and let out a short laugh.
Adequately? Please. You guys are lucky to have me here. But sure, keep your feathers unruffled for now. Just don't come crying to me when you need something real fixed.
Hadar gave a slight nod, still unsure what to make of the young Terran.
We shall see,
he said again, though there was a hint of something else in his voice, perhaps a small crack in the wall of skepticism. As the Saranai crew dispersed, Eli allowed himself a small smile. They might not believe in him yet, but that was okay. He'd been proving people wrong his whole life, and if it took a little more time to convince these ancient feathered beings that he was the real deal, so be it.
Piece of cake,
Eli muttered to himself as he headed toward his next task, the persuader swinging lightly from his belt. The Velaran cruised silently through the vastness of space, its organic hull pulsing gently with life as it moved. Eli had settled into his routine tasks, though he was anything but impressed by the pace at which the Saranai crew operated. To him, it seemed like they took forever to make even the simplest adjustments, and their reverence for the ship's living systems often felt more like a hindrance than help.
Feathers are slower than a snail in molasses,
Eli muttered to himself as he tweaked the ship's environmental controls. He had no patience for their cautious approach. To him, every task was another reminder that the Saranai, for all their wisdom and longevity, were slow learners. They might live for thousands of years, but Eli was convinced they spent most of that time just figuring out which end of the wrench to hold. Eli was deep in thought, grumbling about how long it took the Saranai to make even the simplest decisions, when the alarms blared. His head snapped up as the red warning lights flashed, and the ship's living walls seemed to pulse faster, as if sensing the imminent danger.
Great. What now?
The Saranai engineers in the bay moved with their usual deliberate pace, adjusting the ship's systems as reports of a hostile vessel came in. Eli caught snippets of the transmission from the command center, a Virexian warship approaching fast with weapons hot. The Virexians were a well-known menace in this sector, aggressive, merciless, and always looking for a fight. Eli glanced at the nearest Saranai technician, who was calmly redirecting power to the shields.
You might want to pick up the pace,
he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm.
Those bug-eyed bastards aren't going to wait for you to finish your meditation before they start blowing us to bits.
The technician gave Eli a measured look, but didn't reply, his focus remaining on his task. Eli rolled his eyes and turned his attention to the console in front of him, where he could see the power fluctuations as the ship's systems were taxed by the incoming fire. The first volley from the Virexians hit hard, the ship shuddering under the impact. Eli braced himself against the console, feeling the vibrations reverberate through the living structure of the ship. The Saranai engineers continued their work with maddening calmness, adjusting power outputs and rerouting energy to damaged systems.
For fuck's sake, hit him harder!
Eli barked at no one in particular, knowing full well his voice wouldn't reach the command center.
These bugs aren't here to play nice. You gotta swat them down before they tear us apart.
As the battle raged on, Eli noticed the strain on the ship's vital systems. The organic conduits that ran along the walls were pulsating erratically, and some of the bioluminescent panels were flickering. He could tell that the Velaron was struggling to keep up with the damage it was sustaining.
This is what happens when you're too damn slow,
Eli muttered, pulling up a diagnostic screen. He started redirecting power manually, his hands flying over the controls as he tried to compensate for the ship's sluggish response.
If you guys were any slower, you'd be moving backwards.
The Saranai technicians glanced at him but said nothing, their focus remaining on the battle. Eli couldn't help but feel a surge of frustration. The ship was taking a beating, and he knew that if they didn't start thinking faster, they'd be picking up the pieces of this beautiful, slow-moving beast. Suddenly, the ship lurched as a particular powerful blast from the Virexians hit the engine section. Alarms blared, and lights flickered as the power surge knocked several systems offline. Eli's console flashed with critical alerts, and he swore under his breath.
Damn it! If you just listen to me for once!
Eli muttered as he jumped into action, rerouting power from non-essential systems to keep the engines and shields operational. But the Virexians weren't done. As the battle raged on outside, Eli noticed a new set of alerts flashing across his console. Unauthorized access points, boarding parties detected.
No way,
Eli muttered, his eyes narrowing as he realized what was happening. The Virexians were boarding the ship.
Those sneaky bastards are coming right for us!
He turned to the Saranai technicians, who were already reacting to the new threat, albeit with their usual deliberate caution.
You heard the alarms, Feathers? We've got company! If you don't want them tearing this place apart from the inside, I suggest you grab something very heavy and meet them head on.
Eli wasn't one to wait around. He grabbed his persuader, the heavy hammer feeling reassuring in his grip, and headed for the nearest access corridor. The Saranai, slow to react as usual, finally began to mobilize, setting up defense positions as the sound of Virexian boarding pods clanging against the hull echoed through the ship. The corridors of the Velaron were dimly lit by the ship's bioluminescent flora, casting eerie shadows as Eli moved toward the breach point. He could hear the hissing and clicking of the Virexians as they forced their way through the ship's defenses, and he knew it wouldn't be long before they were face to face with these insectoid invaders. A wicked grin spread across Eli's face as he tightened his grip on the persuader.
Time to squash some bugs,
he muttered, the adrenaline surging through his veins as he reached the breach point. The Saranai were setting up barriers, their weapons trained on the sealed doors that were straining under the pressure from the other side. As the doors burst open, Virexians swarmed through, their multi-limbed bodies and sharp mandibles making them look like something out of a nightmare. The Saranai opened fire, their precision weapons cutting down the first wave, but the Virexians kept coming, undeterred by their losses. Eli didn't hesitate. He charged forward, swinging the hammer with all his might. The first Virexian he hit crumpled under the blow, its carapace cracking with a sickening crunch.
That's right, you ugly bastards,
he shouted, adrenaline pumping through his veins.
Come get some!
The battle in the corridor was brutal. The Saranai fought with their usual discipline, but Eli's approach was far more chaotic and effective. He ducked and weaved through the melee, using the hammer to bash in Virexian skulls and disable their limbs with savage efficiency. The Virexians, not expecting such ferocity from a lone Terran, hesitated just long enough for the Saranai to press the advantage. Within minutes, the Virexian boarding party was either dead or retreating back to their pods. Eli stood amidst the carnage, breathing heavily, his hammer dripping with viscous alien fluids. He glanced at the Saranai soldiers, who were watching him with a mix of shock and grudging respect.
See? Not so hard when you put your back into it,
Eli said, wiping the hammer off on a piece of Virexian armor.
Next time, try hitting them before they start ripping your ship apart from the inside.
The Saranai soldiers exchanged glances but said nothing. They quickly returned to securing the corridor and patching up the breach. Eli, satisfied that he'd made his point, headed back toward the engineering bay. As he walked away, the Saranai engineers watched him with a mix of wariness and newfound respect. They may not have liked his methods, but they couldn't deny that Eli's instincts had been right. The Velaron was still standing, but only just, and it was going to take everything they had, and maybe a little more, to get her back in fighting shape. The aftermath of the battle left the Velaron in a state of disarray. The once majestic ship now limped through space, its organic hull riddled with scars from the Virexian assault. Critical systems were offline, and the ship's usual gentle pulse had slowed to an erratic, uneven rhythm. The crew moved with a sense of urgency that was unusual for the Saranai, but even in their haste, there was a palpable tension hanging in the air. Eli stood in the engineering bay, surveying the damage reports as they flooded in. The news wasn't good. The engines were crippled, the power grid was a mess, and several of the ship's vital systems were barely hanging on. He could see the worry etched on the faces of the Saranai engineers, worry that their slow, methodical approach might not be enough to save the ship this time.
"This ship's a fucking mess,"
Eli muttered, rubbing the back of his neck as he stared at the data streaming across the console.
"We're not getting out of this one with duct tape and prayers."
Nearby, feathered Sage Hadar and the senior Saranai technicians were deep in discussion. Their voices were low, but Eli could hear the frustration in their tones. The ship's situation was dire, and for all their knowledge and experience, the Saranai seemed uncertain about how to proceed.
"We cannot repair the engines with the resources we have on board,"
one of the technicians said, his voice strained.
"The damage is too extensive."
"And the power grid is unstable,"
another added.
"If we attempt to push the systems any further, we risk a complete failure."
Hadar's face was drawn tight with worry.
"Our options are limited," he admitted. "We are stranded and our communications array is offline. We cannot call for help, nor can we travel to a safer location."
The tension in the room thickened as the reality of their situation set in. The Velaron was adrift and without a way to make repairs. They were sitting ducks in hostile space. The crew looked to Hadar for guidance, but even the senior feathered sage seemed at a loss. It was then that Hadar's gaze shifted to Eli, who had been scanning the damage reports with a furrowed brow. The Saranai had always been skeptical of the young Terran's brash methods that Terrans were known for across the galaxy. But now, faced with a situation that demanded quick thinking and unconventional solutions, Hadar couldn't deny the possibility that Eli might be their best hope. Hadar cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the room.
"Technician Drake,"
he said, his voice carefully measured.
"You have shown resourcefulness in the past, and we are in need of fresh perspectives. I would ask that you assist the situation and provide your recommendations."
The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Eli. There was still skepticism in their gazes. After all, Eli was a young child even by Terran standards, brash, and his methods were anything but traditional. But there was also a glimmer of hope, a recognition that their usual approach might not be enough this time. Eli didn't hesitate.
"All right, Feathers,"
he said, stepping forward with his typical swagger.
"Let's see what we're dealing with."
He quickly pieced together the extent of the damage. The engines were the biggest issue. They were barely functional, and without them, the Velaron wasn't going anywhere. The power grid was another problem. It was barely holding together, and if it failed completely, they'd be dead in the water.
"The engines are shot,"
Eli said, his tone matter-of-fact.
"We've got just enough juice to keep the lights on, but not much more. If we don't fix the power grid, we're fucked."
Eli saw his opportunity and pressed on.
"We need parts, and the only place we're going to get them is from that Virexian ship we just trashed. It's risky, sure, but it's our best shot. I'll lead the salvage team. If there are traps, I'll deal with them. We're not going to make it out of here if we don't take some risks."
One of the senior technicians, his feathers slightly ruffled, spoke up.
"Technician Drake, you must understand the Virexian and Saranai technology are vastly different. It may not be compatible with our systems."
Eli shrugged. unbothered by the concern.
Different tech, same shit. Wiring's wiring. Power's power. I'll make it work. We don't have time to get picky.
Hadar hesitated, clearly weighing the risks.
It is a dangerous proposition, he said slowly. But you may be right. We have little choice.
The Saranite crew exchanged uneasy glances. Salvaging parts from an enemy ship was dangerous, especially given the Virexians' reputation for booby-trapping their vessels. But Eli's assessment was accurate. They didn't have many options.
Very well,
Hadar said at last.
Prepare a team and proceed with caution, Technician Drake. The lives of this crew depend on your success.
Eli gave a confident nod.
Don't worry, Sage. I've got this. Just keep the ship in one piece until I get back.
As Eli left the engineering bay to gather his team, the Saranai watched him go, their skepticism still lingering but tempered by the knowledge that Eli had proven himself capable before. Now more than ever, they needed his unorthodox methods and quick thinking. The Valaran's fate, it seemed, rested in the hands of a brash young Terran who had always been ready to defy the odds. Eli suited up, securing his toolkit at his side, Persuader as always, dangling from his belt. The Saranite team watched as he prepared for the mission, their expressions a mix of skepticism and hope. The Virexian ship, now a derelict hulk drifting in space, loomed ahead, its jagged silhouette a stark contrast to the organic curves of the Valaran.
You ready for this, Feathers?
Eli quipped to the small team of Saranite technicians who had reluctantly agreed to accompany him.
Don't worry. I'll do the heavy lifting. Just try not to shit yourselves when things get hairy.
One of the Saranite technicians, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, replied,
We're not accustomed to this kind of operation, Technician Drake.
Eli smirked.
Yeah, well, I'm not accustomed to babysitting a bunch of overgrown parrots, but here we are. Let's get this over with.
The Saranai, unaccustomed to Eli's brash manner, simply nodded and followed him into the airlock. As the doors sealed and the atmosphere was vented, Eli felt the familiar thrill of a challenge rising within him. He had been in tight spots before, but salvaging parts from an enemy ship was a new level of crazy, and he fucking loved it. The airlock doors opened to reveal the vast emptiness of space and the wrecked Virexian vessel ahead. With a push, Eli launched himself across the void, his boots magnetically clamping onto the hull of the Virexian ship as he made contact. The Saranai followed suit, albeit more cautiously. As they made their way into the ship, Eli quickly realized just how different seeing Virexian technology was from anything he'd read about before. The corridors were dark and twisted, the walls lined with pulsating, organic-looking conduits that seemed to be alive. The ship's interior was a maze of sharp angles and shadowy recesses, a far cry from the sleek, polished environments Eli was used to.
Feels like we're walking through a giant insect's intestines,
Eli muttered, glancing back at the Saranai.
Stay close. And for fuck's sake, don't touch anything unless I say so. Last thing we need is for one of you to trigger something nasty.
One of the Saranite technicians, eyes wide as he looked around, asked,
Are you sure you know what you're doing?
Eli chuckled.
I'm the kid who's been fixing shit since before I could tie my own shoes. I'll figure this out. Just trust me.
They pressed on, navigating the ship's twisted corridors until they encountered their first obstacle, an energy barrier blocking access to one of the ship's main power conduits.
Looks like the bugs didn't want anyone snooping around,
Eli remarked, studying the barrier.
Give me a sec.
One of the Saranite technicians peered at the barrier, worry etched on his face.
Isn't this dangerous? What if it's booby-trapped?
Eli grinned, pulling out his plasma spanner.
If it is, then we'll work it out real quick, won't we? Besides, danger is part of the job. Now watch and learn.
He knelt down using the plasma spanner to pry open a nearby panel. Inside, a mess of unfamiliar circuitry greeted him, but Eli didn't hesitate. He quickly identified the power source for the barrier and started rewiring it. The Saranai watched in awe as Eli's hands moved with practiced precision, bypassing the security system in no time.
There.
Eli said with a grin, as the energy barrier flickered and died.
Piece of fucking cake.
Another technician, still uneasy, muttered,
You make it look so easy, but this is Phyrexian tech. It's nothing like ours.
Eli shrugged.
Different tech, same shit. Wiring's wiring, power's power. I'll make it work. We don't have time to get picky.
The group pressed on, navigating the ship's twisted corridors and overcoming more security measures along the way. At one point, they stumbled upon a room filled with what appeared to be a nest of Phyrexian drones, damaged but still active. The drones buzzed and clicked, their red eyes glowing ominously as they detected the intruders.
Feathers, hold them off!
He shouted as he pulled out his persuader. He swung the hammer with all his might, smashing one of the drones to pieces in a shower of sparks.
Fucking pests. Disgusting,
he said, flicking its guts off of the persuader. One of the Saranite technicians, trying to keep up with Eli's pace, stammered.
This is insane! How are you so calm?
Eli chuckled as he bashed another drone.
Calm? Who says I'm calm? I'm just better at pretending. Now quit talking and start smashing!
The Saranite technicians, though hesitant at first, joined in, using their tools and weapons to kill the remaining drones. With the threat neutralized, Eli wiped the sweat from his brow and chuckled.
I guess these bugs forgot to put up a real fight. Let's keep moving before they change their minds.
After what felt like hours of navigating the alien ship, Eli finally found what he was looking for, a main power distribution node. Still intact, despite the damage the ship had taken, he carefully began dismantling it, using his plasma spanner to extract the critical components. One of the Sornai, watching Eli work, asked, "How do you know which parts to take?" Eli grinned, not looking up from his work.
Experience and a little bit of luck. Besides, if I fuck it up, you'll be the first to know.
As he worked, Eli encountered more challenges, unexpected power surges, strange Phyrexian tech that defied his usual understanding, and even a hidden trap designed to fry anyone who tampered with the ship's systems. But with each obstacle, Eli's resourcefulness and quick thinking shone through. He bypassed circuits, rerouted power, and diffused the trap with a steady hand and a few choice words.
Fucking bugs think they're clever,
Eli muttered as he disarmed the trap.
I've seen better setups in a back alley chop shop.
Finally, Eli held up the salvaged components, a triumphant grin on his face.
All right, that should do it. This stuff isn't exactly plug and play, but I'll make it work. Let's get back to the Velaron before the rest of this ship decides to throw another tantrum.
The Saranai technicians, impressed by Eli's expertise, followed him back to the airlock without a word. As they made their way back to the Velaron, Eli couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He'd taken on the challenge, faced down the unknown, and come out on top.
Not bad for a goddamn Terran kid, eh?
Eli said with a grin as they re-entered the engineering bay. The Saranai didn't respond immediately, but the looks of respect in their eyes spoke volumes. With the salvaged parts in hand, Eli knew they had a fighting chance to get the Velaron back on its feet. The battle wasn't over, but they were one step closer to survival. Thanks to a little Terran ingenuity, a lot of guts, and just enough vulgarity to get the job done. Eli wasted no time diving into the delicate task of integrating the salvaged Phyrexian parts with the Saranai technology. The engineering bay was a flurry of activity, with the Saranai crew working diligently to stabilize the ship's systems. But despite their efforts, all eyes kept drifting back to Eli, the kid who had taken on the impossible task.
All right, let's see what we're working with,
Eli muttered to himself as he laid out the salvaged components on the workbench. The parts were a mix of alien metals and strange organic materials, nothing like what he was used to. But Eli wasn't one to back down from a challenge. The Saranai engineers watched from a safe distance, their expressions a mix of skepticism and hope. Feathered Sage Hadar stood nearby, his gaze fixed on Eli as the young technician set to work. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew the stakes were high. Eli began carefully connecting the Phyrexian components to Saranai systems, his hands moving with practiced precision as he used his plasma spanner to weld and fuse the alien tech into place. For a while, everything seemed to be going smoothly, and the tension in the room began to ease. But then, as Eli attempted to secure a critical component, a power regulator, into the ship's main power grid, he hit a major snag. The part didn't fit. It was too large for the Saranai housing, and the connectors were completely incompatible. Shit! Eli cursed under his breath, stepping back to assess the situation. The Saranai crew, sensing something was wrong, inched closer, their eyes wide with concern. One of the Saranai engineers spoke up, his voice laced with doubt. "Is there a problem, Technician Drake? It appears that the component is unsuitable." Eli shot him a look. "No shit, Feathers. It's not exactly a match made in heaven, but I didn't come this far to let a little thing like size stop me." The Saranai looked at each other, uncertainty spreading through the group. Hedar, his expression serious, asked, "Can you make it work, Eli?" Eli grinned, pulling the persuader, his trusty hammer, from his belt.
"I'm about to show you how a real tech handles this."
The Saranai engineers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what Eli was about to do. They had seen him use the persuader on the Virexian ship, but this was different. This was their ship, and the idea of using brute force on such delicate systems made them nervous. Eli didn't care. He wasn't about to let some alien tech get the better of him.
"All right, you stubborn bastard,"
he muttered to the uncooperative part.
"Time to make you fit."
With a few precise swings of the persuader, Eli began forcing the power regulator into place. Each strike was measured and deliberate, just enough to reshape the component without damaging it. The Saranai crew watched in stunned silence as Eli literally hammered the alien tech into submission.
"Come on, you piece of shit!"
Eli grunted as he made a final adjustment.
"There we go. Perfect fucking fit."
He stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow, and looked at his handiwork. The power regulator was now snugly in place, its connectors aligned just well enough to function. It wasn't pretty, but Eli had made it work. The Saranai engineers stared at the fitted part in amazement. One of them, still shocked by what he had just witnessed, asked, "Will it function properly?" Eli gave him a confident smirk.
"It'll work. Might not look pretty, but it'll get the job done. Now let's fire this thing up and see if it sings."
With a few final adjustments, Eli completed the integration and stepped back from the console.
"All right, Sage,"
he called out to Hedar.
"Time to hit the switch. Let's see if we've got power."
Hedar hesitated for a moment before nodding to one of the Saranai engineers. The engineer activated the power grid, and the room held its collective breath as the system hummed to life. Lights flickered on, the hum of the ship's systems grew steadier, and the Velaron seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as power coursed through its veins once more. Eli grinned broadly, turning to the Saranai with a cocky smile.
"Not bad for a goddamn Terran kid, eh?"
The room, which had been tense with anticipation, suddenly erupted into relieved cheers. The Saranai crew, though still a bit shocked by Eli's methods, couldn't deny the results. The Velaron was back online, and they had Eli to thank for it. Hedar approached Eli, a look of respect in his eyes.
"You have done well, Technician Drake. The ship is in your debt."
Eli shrugged, still holding the persuader.
"Just another day at the office, Sage. Now let's get this bird flying again."
With the critical repairs complete and the power grid stabilized, the Velaron was ready to resume its journey. Thanks to Eli's quick thinking, crude methods, and a trusty persuader, they had managed to pull off the impossible. As the ship's systems hummed back to life, the flickering lights stabilized, and the steady thrum of the engines returned, the tension that had gripped the Velaron's engineering bay began to dissipate. The power grid, now reinforced with the salvaged Virexian components, was holding steady. Though the ship was far from being back to full capacity, still they were operational, and that was a victory in itself. Eli stood back, the persuader hanging loosely in his grip, as he watched the readouts on the console, everything seeming to be working, and despite the unconventional repairs, the ship was alive again. He held out a long breath, only now realizing how exhausted he was. The adrenaline that had kept him going through the intense operation was finally wearing off, leaving him feeling drained but deeply satisfied.
"Looks like we're back in business,"
Eli muttered, a tired but triumphant grin spreading across his face. The Saranai crew, who had been holding their breath as the ship's systems flickered back online, began to relax. There was a palpable sense of relief in the room, though their reserved nature kept them from showing too much emotion. Even so, a few of the engineers exchanged glances of appreciation, and one or two even offered Eli a nod of respect. "Technician Drake," one of the engineers said cautiously, "your methods are unconventional, but you have saved the ship." Eli smirked, brushing off the thinly veiled compliment.
Yeah, well, sometimes you gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet. Or in this case, smash a few parts until they fit.
Feathered Sage Hadar approached Eli, his unusual stern demeanor softened just slightly.
"You have done well, Eli. The Velaron is operational because of your efforts. It may not be perfect, but it is enough to get us through."
Eli nodded, feeling a swell of pride. He had been through hell and back, but he had come out on top, and more importantly, he had earned the respect of these ancient, cautious beings who had initially doubted him. They might not be showering him with praise, but the subtle nods and the way they looked at him now spoke volumes.
"Just doing my job, Sage,"
Eli replied, trying to play it cool, even as the exhaustion tugged at him. Hadar gave Eli a long, thoughtful look before nodding.
"You have proven yourself today, not just as a technician, but as a member of this crew. Your skills will be needed as we move forward, and I would ask that you continue to assist us in more critical tasks."
It was a significant gesture from the senior feathered sage, one that did not go unnoticed by the rest of the crew. For the Saranai, this was as close to a formal acknowledgement of Eli's value as they got. Eli might have been just a kid, but now he was the kid who had saved their ship.